Welcome to Surviving the Troubled Teen Industry, the podcast where survival becomes a voice and healing becomes a journey. Join me, Nora, a survivor of the troubled teen industry and an activist working for industry reform while supporting the survivor community. In this podcast, we'll unveil the hidden truths, expose the pain and suffering, and confront the system that has left lasting scars on so many lives. Through the voices of survivors, experts, and advocates, we aim to shed light on an industry shrouded in darkness for far too long. Having survived this industry myself, I understand the trauma, the secrets, and the struggle that come with it. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the stories of survivors, uncover the harsh truths, and confront the injustices that have persisted for decades. Our goal is clear: to provide a platform for survivors to share their experiences, offer support to those who have endured similar ordeals, and advocate for change. Join me on this journey as we transform pain into strength and aim to create a safer, more compassionate world for those who've walked this challenging path. Welcome to Surviving the Troubled Teen Industry. I'm here with Dylan. He is a survivor from May 2018 to August of 2022. Dylan is a survivor of 3 programs over the course of 4 years. Today, we'll be focusing on his last and most recent program, the Grove School, located in Madison, Connecticut. The Grove School prides itself on offering 3 types of programs: residential, transition, and day. Each offers a different level of structure, therapy, and education for youth in mental, educational, and/or family crisis. Dylan attended the transitional program at the Grove School from January 2020 until August 2022. During his time in the program, he befriended a new student named Mia Gabrielle Fontana. Today, Dylan and I will be discussing the case of her death at the Grove School, just weeks after her arrival, when the program failed to protect her and provide her appropriate mental health care for her diagnosed conditions. Dylan is still in close contact with Mia's family and will be referring to portions of the publicly available lawsuit filed by her parents to recount the details of Mia's case. So Dylan, could you start by telling us a little bit about your experience? What programs did you go to before the Grove School?
So I started, I was taken through what's known as legal transport, or by the kids who went through it is often referred to as gooning, which is where 2 people kind of basically legally kidnap you and bring you to a program. And that happened from a psych ward on my birthday, on my 15th birthday, and May 22nd of 2018, where I was sent to Wingate Wilderness Therapy for about 10 weeks. And that was really my first introduction to the troubled teens industry. And one thing I do want to say for sure is, before I even start any of this, I do not believe that the entire troubled teens industry is a bad idea. I think that the idea is there because if I were not sent to Wilderness in 2018, I would not be alive today. And I truly mean that. What I do also think,
I personally think that residential treatment is going to be something that parents always look for, and that the industry needs reform, not abolishment.
I agree. And it was very helpful, but I started very quickly going back into old ways. And then I agreed with my parents that I needed to be sent to a different residential and was sent to Discovery Ranch for boys in Mapleton, Utah. And Discovery Ranch is, I guess the best way I would describe it is their goal is to break you down till you are nothing and to build you back up in their image.
Correct. That's a very common tactic with troubled teen programs, except they don't build you back up.
One phrase that was said by every kid there, never by the adults, but every single kid, is fake it till you make it, which basically means you don't get out of there unless you choose to change fundamentally who you are.
Right.
And you got to just fake it till you make it. And I was there for 13 months, and the schooling system was like very different than normal school. We had school from 3 to 7, and it was all what I describe as workbook work. And so very different from normal high school. And because of that, I was sent to a step down program that was supposed to readjust me back to life before heading back to school, which was the Grove School, which is a therapeutic boarding school in Madison, Connecticut.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Grove School and their transitional program? Because I understand they have residential, transitional, and then a day program. What exactly is a transitional program? And how are they different from like strict residential treatment programs or therapeutic boarding schools?
So I would consider it as a therapeutic boarding school. I personally was a residential student, so that's really what I can speak for. They also had day students, which would be people who were just dropped off daily like a normal school more so. But the biggest difference between Grove School and a normal high school is that you have a therapist you have a team of 3 people, which is a therapist, an academic advisor, and a med doctor or psychiatrist. And you have those 3 people there when you need them, at least that's the idea. And there's also some restrictions, for example, like Wi-Fi turns off at 10, but compared to, say, Discovery Ranch, my sole source of technology was an AM/FM radio, and I only got that after about 6 months in. So that compared to having my phone, as I did at Grove School, having technology was a huge difference.
So these step down or transitional programs, they offer, I guess I would say, a little bit of a higher level of freedom and independence.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Most places that I've been to, not Wilderness, but Discovery Ranch for sure, and the Grove School for sure, have a leveling system. So as you do better in the program and gain more trust with the staff, you level up more, get more freedoms. And yeah, so with Grove School, they had a check-in system. When you got there, you were placed in what's known as supervision, which means you're with staff all times. They had radios and they'd call you from place to place. So you'd head there immediately, and that was that. And then once you're there for 2 weeks, you are able to put in a form that basically says that you would like to go for your 15-minute check-ins, which means that I could say, talk to my dorm staff and say, I'll checking in. She knows I'm on 15s, or they know I'm on 15s. And then I just have to be back and check in again 15 minutes later.
With the transition from supervision to 15s, is there an evaluations required for that?
Yeah. So like I said, with the form, what that basically means is we have people called AODs there, which stands for Administrator on Duty, or Academic Advisor. For example, my academic advisor was John Ainsley, and he was also an AOD. And they would basically meet all together, talk about how your progress has been so far, and determine whether or not you are eligible for 15s.
Okay. And then what does the rest of the leveling system look like? What happens after 15s?
So after 15s, I believe that you have to wait at least 4 weeks and then have another evaluation type thing. Then you have 30s, which is you can check in for 30 minutes at a time. And then after that is another 4 weeks, I believe. And then you get 45s, again, 45-minute check-ins. Then you have to wait 6 weeks. I believe, I'm not certain on that, but I believe that is the amount. And then you get another evaluation for hours, and then 6 more weeks, another evaluation for downtowns. And for downtowns, you can check in with the main office and head downtown for up to 3 hours.
Okay, so with this program, you're allowed off campus.
Yes. And
Okay.
once you've also hit downtowns, like you're allowed to, again, trying to get people back to normal life, like you're allowed to have an on-campus job, for example. So
Okay.
you can work off campus and again start living back to that normal life, if you will.
Let's talk some about Mia. Why was she sent to the Grove School, and why was she placed in the program that she was?
So she was sent there for depression, anxiety being the 2 main ones.
Mhm.
She had come from a program called Newport. While there, she made multiple suicide attempts, and was actively self-harming,
So that
as
was
well as,
that's Newport Academy.
yes.
Okay.
And I guess they had decided to discharge her, and she needed a step down program because I would rate Newport as somewhere not as lax as Grove, but also not as strict as Discovery Ranch. From what I've heard about, I've not been there, so I cannot say for certain, but from what I know, that's where I would rate it as.
Let's talk about how the Grove School failed to give Mia proper care and treatment. Were staff
Yep.
authorized and or trained in treating children with suicidal ideation? And what did the school claim to offer for kids like Mia, who was a traumatized 15-year-old kid in severe enough mental health crisis that it caused suicidal ideation? Did she meet the requirements to be in the program that she was in?
I don't believe that she did, to be honest. The Grove School has what's known as their student handbook, which is basically a list of like things that it's either a student handbook or a parent's handbook that describes everything that should be happening or
Okay.
that should be required. For example, they say they have a list of things of like people who they will take. For example, ADD/ADHD, nonverbal learning disability, attachment disorders, anxiety, autism, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, and so forth. And they
Okay.
also have a list of people who they claim to not accept. For example, actively suicidal or severely self-injurious, chronic runaways, or actively psychotic, which Mia was both actively suicidal and severely self-injurious, as well as a chronic runaway.
She never should have been at the Grove School,
My
according to
opinion,
their
no.
requirements.
According to Grove's requirements as to what they allow, she should not have been there.
What were Mia's demeanor and behavior like in the time between her arrival at the Grove School and her death? Did you notice any changes in her at all? And did staff notice any changes?
So personally, she was not at Grove very long. I want to say it was about 4 weeks.
Mhm.
And I only knew her for probably about 3 of those weeks because personally, whenever a new person came, I always gave them a week to just kind of adjust before introducing myself. But one thing that I did notice was a lot of suicide jokes, which frankly, I made them. Everyone there made them. It wasn't really an uncommon thing.
Mhm.
And looking back at it now, I can recognize that she was most likely extremely manic in a lot of ways that I didn't really see just
From what
because,
you've described, I would definitely agree with that. I remember you saying something about her feeling a strong urge to be in physical contact with an animal.
yeah, there was one day when she described just having a strong urge. We had a hobby farm there, and she just picked up a bunny and started walking around campus with the bunny, which normally, like, we have times for the hobby farm. We go there, take care of the bunnies, and you have to ask specifically to take one out of the hobby farm. One day she just went in, picked one up, and started walking around.
So without
And
permission.
no permission whatsoever. She just walked right in.
So she was able to go in and take the rabbit out without anybody noticing, I'm assuming, and without permission. What was supervision like at the Grove School?
So, I mean, from what I've talked to numerous staffs because when you're there for 2.5 years, you get to know people.
Mhm.
And one thing I noticed is staff were severely underpaid. The conditions for their living, I mean, there was one building that was in bad enough shape that the ceiling due to water fell down on her while she was sleeping twice.
Wow.
So like living conditions weren't great. Staff, like people who were there trying their best to help people with little to no training. They try to, I mean, they tried to keep watch of everyone, but they didn't always do an amazing job.
Right. They're not being paid enough to care.
Yeah, I mean, they're also given way more responsibilities than they're really capable of doing.
Tell us about Mia's last day. Did anything specific happen that triggered her suicidal ideations, or was it kind of like a slow buildup?
So the truth is, I don't know much about her last day because I remember about 2 days before I got a text from her. We were planning on going to a club together, and all the text was just, "I'm not going to club today." To which I thought, okay, we're at a therapeutic boarding school. Most likely something came up, whether it's with parents or whatever. And I gave her space. And I still remember the last thing that I had ever really said to her was, sometimes I think the only thing keeping me alive is my own laziness. I had meant it more in a passively suicidal way than an actively.
Right.
And I've spent a lot of time thinking if she meant it the same way or not.
Well, that goes along with the mentality that seemed like it was pretty rampant at the school, where suicide wasn't taken seriously.
Not at all. I mean, jokes were made nonstop. I mean, what I've seen, it's hard to take people's suicide jokes seriously when nonstop people are faking disorders, whether it's
Right.
Tourette's. I've seen someone fake leukemia once while I was there as a way to get attention. Like,
So here's a question. Aside from just the attention, why would somebody fake a disorder like that at a program?
because sometimes seeing, sometimes creating your own problems is easier than dealing with the problems in front of you.
I think that's a
I mean,
really
I,
good
for
point.
one, I was vaping a lot, and there were times when I would be having issues with my parents and then just turn in an old vape that I hadn't used in months, tucked away somewhere, just so that the attention would be off of the stuff that was hard for me and onto stuff that I know how to deal with.
Right, right. You'd create something to essentially be punished for, rather than being
Yeah,
punished for the things that you can't help.
exactly.
That speaks a lot to the mentality that kids have when they're sent away to these places.
Because
Um,
I'd rather, like, I've been caught vaping before. I'd rather deal with that than deal with whatever's happening between my parents that I can't control.
yeah, yeah, that's understandable. I think that's a common coping mechanism for anybody who's experienced trauma, deflecting the the attention away from the real issues, um,
Yeah.
because it's something you can deal with. So back to Mia. In reviewing the lawsuit her parents filed, it seems she was missing for hours before the program took notice. Can you tell us more about that? Like, when did
Sure.
the program realize she was missing?
He was pronounced dead at 5:10 a.m., in which then Amtrak called the Madison Police Department. And according to them, they were called for a report of a person struck by a train. And then based on the age of the deceased girl, and this is a quote, due to past police encounters, the officers from the Madison Police Department went to Grove School to check if there were any missing students. So at about 6 a.m., they got to Grove, which, keep in mind, is 50 minutes after she was announced dead. They arrived at Grove School, and Grove School had no idea that they had a student missing, so they did a quick check and then realized, oh, wait a minute, we have a student missing. We should do something.
Yeah.
And um, they notified Mia's dad, who the first thing that he said was, did you check the railroad tracks? She had expressed to her therapist previously that if she were to ever commit suicide, she always knows how she would do it, and had mentioned something along the lines of railroad tracks.
Okay. So it had been mentioned before that that was her plan.
Yep.
And Grove School knew that she had a plan
Yes.
and chose not to put a safety plan in place.
Correct.
If somebody expresses suicidal ideation, the first thing you do is take it seriously. And the second thing you do is put together a safety plan.
Yeah. And one thing that, like, even going back to when she first got to Grove, she had mentioned, she and her parents in her intake meeting had mentioned that a safety plan had worked really well at Newport Academy. And then after that bunny incident that I went over briefly, she had expressed to her advisor, academic advisors, more so just not just for academics, more so for everyday type stuff. She'd expressed to her that she was surprised she didn't have a safety plan and was surprised that Grove didn't care enough.
And her safety plan at Newport was something that she wanted to have, right? And was accepting
Yeah.
of.
As far as I'm aware, yes.
She felt it was working.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware. Yes.
And Grove School decided not only not to carry that over, but also not to give her a new one.
Correct.
This lawsuit also outlines some of the ways Grove School failed to protect Mia. And these include some falsified documentation. Could you share some more detail on what that was and how it was falsified? Who was responsible for falsifying that?
So there were two instances, one with a therapist and one with the night shift who was on duty. So I'll start with the second one.
Okay.
Grove School has a third shift of night staff, which their job is to check in on the kids. Check in on the kids, I believe it's every 30 minutes. Yeah, so it's 30 minutes from 11 p.m. till 3 a.m. and then 45-minute bed checks from 3 a.m. until 6 a.m.
Okay.
And from my experience of being there, that did not happen. We were lucky if, like, as someone who has insomnia, I was up late a lot of times. There were nights when a staff would never come by even once. There were nights when a staff would come by like once or twice. But the biggest issue was, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's 6 boys dorms and I want to say 6 girls dorms as well. And they have like 4 people doing all of it. If that. There are nights where there's even less than that. There was even a night when a staff that was supposed to be our night shift staff was sleeping on the couch, and then me and my friend tucked him in because we felt bad for him. Like, they're completely overworked and it's crazy. But back to those falsified documents. So on her bed check, she was accounted for at 4 a.m., 4:45 a.m., and 5:30 a.m. In
So that last
contradiction,
one was
after she was dead.
already dead.
It had an S for sleeping next to every bed check for all 7 students, which I'll tell you right now, I was never the only one up. There were always people awake long before that time. And there was a detective with the police who, his last name was Hansen, Detective Hansen, and he had looked at the cameras and saw that she left her dorm through the window at about 4:09 a.m. on May 20th and was captured on at least 3 other security cameras as she walked off Grove School campus towards the train tracks. Staff did nothing. What there is supposed to be is a staff in every dorm and then one on cameras constantly. The staff who was supposed to be on cameras was also assigned to the 6 boys' dorms. It is impossible for her to be in 6 boys' dorms checking every 30 to 45 minutes, as well as staying on cameras constantly. It is not possible. She cannot be in 7 places at once.
Right. Let me read this from the lawsuit. It says the Amtrak Police Department conducted the lead investigation on May 20th, 2021, which is the date of Mia's death. Robert Hansen, Detective Hansen for the APD, met with Peter and/or Richard Chorney at Grove School. Detective Hansen asked about the accountability practices for students overnight, and Peter and/or Richard Chorney stated that residential staff checked on students every 45 minutes. Peter and/or Richard Chorney also stated Grove School staff accounted for Mia at 4 a.m., 4:45 a.m., and 5:30 a.m. Grove School security camera shows Mia leaving her dorm at or around 4:09 a.m. on May 20th, 2021. And as you said, she was captured on at least, so that'd be 4 cameras as she walked off the campus toward the train tracks.
Not a single staff stopped her the entire way.
It also goes on to say, as such, Grove School staff, specifically Miss Zaccarelli, who marked Mia as asleep and in bed at 4:45 a.m., claimed to have accounted for her over 35 minutes after she had left the dorm.
Yeah.
Not only did Miss Zaccarelli falsely mark Mia as sleeping after she left the dorm, but also marked her as sleeping after she had been tragically struck by a train and killed.
Yep.
And the day before, you said she was put on escort or supervision?
I believe it was the day before. It might have been 2 days. I'm not certain. I'd have to.
It says here the 19th, so the day before.
Then yeah, the day before.
So she snuck out the window and left.
Yeah.
Okay. And the lawsuit also outlines the fact that she had a plan and that Grove School was aware of that.
And also, in addition to the falsified night reports, that I can understand more so being falsified purely based off of the fact that this is a staff who had no training really on what to do, was just told, be here, check the people every 30 minutes, what to write down.
Right. And as you said, there was no training and not very good pay.
Yeah. What's harder for me to believe is Amy, or I believe it's Amy Stevens. 1 second. Let me just 1 sec. It's not Amy. I know that much. Give me one
Sarah
moment.
Hallwood?
Yeah. Sarah Hallwood was her assigned therapist, and she tried to falsify the records that were on for Mia's intake meeting. There were no notes there, and she tried adding them a week after she had died, which was over a month later.
So it says here, the Grove School staff raised concerns about Mia's ability to be safe at Grove as soon as her first day on campus, April 19th, 2021. That day, Mia and Mrs. Fontana, her mother, met with Grove School staff for an intake meeting. Following the intake meeting, Miss Hallwood, this is Sarah Hallwood, her therapist, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Mia's therapist at Grove noticed Mia's past homicidal ideation and suicidal ideation and past self-harm as recently as 21 days ago, and further noted that Mia had 4 previous suicide attempts, 3 of which occurred during her stay at Newport Academy. Ms. Hallwood's notes for the April 19th, 2021 intake meeting were created over a month later on May 31st, 2021, 11 days after Mia's death, and are incorrect with respect to Mia's suicide attempts while at Newport. So they were aware of that, but they did not document that. You document everything.
Yeah.
And just the fact that she didn't even acknowledge the fact that she had prior suicide attempts at a program.
Yep. And one thing that I do want to touch on briefly, my guess as to the reason why she was admitted, even though frankly she shouldn't have been, would be the price of the school. Because Grove School, for a residential student, annual tuition is $144,000 a year. That's as of last I checked, or that would have been when I got in. The papers I have are from 2020. It could have gone up since then. When I was at Discovery Range, I remember the tuition was $13,000 a month, meaning in total 12,000 less a year, but you could see where the money was going. You could see they had a fully functioning range set up. They were raising cattle. You could see where that was going. With Grove School, it clearly wasn't going to the staff. It wasn't going to the housing either, considering the roof falling down on people.
So I just pulled up a little bit of information about the Grove School. It says here, incidental expenses include but are not limited to transportation, medical and dental fees, clothing purchases, school supplies, books, laundry, special instruction, and special recreational events, including international travel, skiing, and the schooner sailing program.
I will say though, based off of that information, laundry is a great example.
Mhm.
Laundry was not part of that tuition. Laundry was paid separately $100 a week.
Wow.
Even like during COVID, when we were getting COVID tests, it cost $100 a week for every single COVID test because we're getting tested every week.
Right.
And that was an addition. They also require a $1,000 down payment for any funds that come up, such as getting food or snacks or anything like that. That comes from your parents in addition to tuition.
Right. It says here the deposit required upon admission will be the first and last month's tuition payment of $12,150. And then it goes on to say that partial funding may be covered by parents, school districts, or social services, or a combination. But yeah, it looks like the down payment is over $12,000.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like
And considering
during
that, how many students does Grove hold?
I believe that their max was about 100, and that includes day students. So I am not entirely certain
You said about 100?
about that.
That's almost $1.5 million in deposits alone.
Yep, in 1 month.
Wow. That's I mean, that's one thing that I always like to discuss when I get the opportunity is the costs of these programs.
It's crazy. I mean, like one thing they always talked about how they were going to build a new building and then they had to wait because I guess what was it? What did they say? Construction prices went up due to COVID.
Mhm.
But looking at the math, that makes no sense.
Mm-mm.
What,
No,
even
and
like putting that aside,
the kids were probably required to do all the work too, right? Not
not that I'm
trained
aware of.
laborers.
Not that I'm aware of for Grove, at least.
Okay.
But like literally, the middle house was one of the dorms, and it had a noticeable lean. That was the dorm where the roof fell down on a staff multiple times. The whole building looked like it could come down at any moment.
$1.5 million in deposits alone in a month.
It's crazy.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So a concept that we discussed when we were talking was the fact that with Mia's death, that brought Grove School, that placed Grove School as the deadliest program in the industry and introduced the concept of a deadliest program. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, it's weird for me to talk about because I was in I was in treatment for so long that that kind of thing almost became normal. I mean, even since Mia died, like it was just, I want to say last fall, so it'd be fall of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I learned one of the staff had died in a car accident. And one of my friends who had just died had been drinking, fell asleep on his back, and died. And he had just graduated. He was the smartest kid I ever knew. Like, when you're in a place where bad things happen for long enough, those bad things become just part of normal life.
You've become
So, like,
desensitized to it.
yeah. So, seeing it labeled as something like that, for the longest time, I just saw it as the school I go to and not really much more than that. And what's also crazy to me is I believe it's 4 deaths. Is that correct?
Yep.
So I don't like, you have to do a lot of research to find any of them, even. Like after Mia died, for example, they literally put, I hope, like I know that this year's events have been hard, but I hope we see it as water under the bridge. Because they cover these things up, parents don't know what they're getting into. Parents are just struggling to find a place that can keep their kid alive,
Right.
which the fact that that term even exists is insane to me. I mean, these places are meant to help people. They're meant to save lives, frankly, but that's not what they are.
No, they're not.
And I really wish that we could live in a perfect world where treatment was helpful. But in this day and age, the whole troubled teens industry, they just cover it up. And I mean, the reason I'm on this podcast today is because they have tried so many times to cover it up. And I need Mia's story to be heard, because if it doesn't, it's not an if it's going to happen, it's a when.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's happened 4 times. You think someone didn't try to have this conversation before?
Yeah.
Like, the unfortunate truth that I have is this was not the first. And if something drastic does not change, it will not be the last.
It won't. And it's interesting that you mentioned the buildings falling down, because the first 2 deaths that happened at Grove were actually 2 of the first deaths in the troubled teen industry. There were 2 in 1971, 1 in 1976, and then 2 in 1979 that were at the Grove School. Peter Cooper and Jonathan Lenoff, 17 and 18, died in a fire on April 23rd, 1979. It was ruled an accidental fire, but it broke out in a Pinewood building that was apparently up to code.
It was the Red Lick. I mean, I'd heard stories and such about the Red Lick burning down. There was a staff that worked there who we know was kicked out, but never learned why. And there was a rumor that was constantly floating around that he was the one who set the fire. So
that wouldn't have surprised me.
Neither would it me.
And you were at that program. The third death at Grove was February 24th, 2005. Brendan John Ogonowski, 18. That was ruled an accidental fall, but they say that it may have been suicide. And this
was that the one that was off the dining hall roof?
Yes. Yep.
That was confirmed as suicide while I was there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Not confirmed officially, but hearing mutterings from staff and students alike, I'm 99% sure.
That would make sense.
Mia had even talked about climbing the dining hall at one point.
So she was alluding to suicide the whole time she was there.
Yeah.
Crying for help.
Yeah.
And they failed her every step.
Nothing. Yep.
One sad thing about Brendan Ogonowski's case is that you know how after people die, people ask for donations to places in lieu of flowers?
Yeah.
Well, his parents asked that donations be given to the Grove School.
Because, I mean, that's what these places just in general do. Is I can promise you right now, I mean, like, even being in college like I am right now, there was a staff member that I did not know because I was a freshman, and she died. And there were 2 grief counselors that were there for like 2 weeks for anyone who needed them. At Grove, you just had your normal therapy sessions and hope for the best.
Right.
Which is, looking at it now, crazy to me. I mean, like, yeah, it's crazy.
Speaking of the costs of these places, do you know, or can you talk about what Mia's family is asking for in their lawsuit?
I'm not certain, to be honest.
Okay. I just know from my research that with deaths, when lawsuits are awarded monetary compensation for deaths, it
And
very
what I do
rarely
know,
covers the cost of tuition that the parents have paid. They
yeah,
don't even get their money back. Mhm.
what I believe the Fontanas are truly looking for is not money, it's change. They want the publicity of this because otherwise, like I said, it will happen again.
Mhm. It absolutely
And
will. And living in Utah, I already have a group of survivors and allies who are literally ready to go at the drop of a hat to go down and protest the next one.
it's crazy. I mean, like the amount of shit that stuff that happens is just money
It's
can't solve all problems. Money can't bring
no,
her back. You can't
mm-mm,
pay for like there is no amount of money that is worth Mia's soul.
no, and there never will be.
There never will be. You could give me $1 trillion. Like if someone literally gave me the choice of $1 trillion or to have my best friend back, I will take the second one any day.
Yeah. Um, is there anything else in the lawsuit that you wanted to specifically touch on?
For any parents trying to send, I guess the last thing I'd say is just any parents trying to send their kids to a place, do your research. Any place you go to, look up the name of the place followed by lawsuit, see what comes up. I
That's
can,
really solid advice.
yeah, I can somewhat understand it if there hasn't been an issue in say over 20 years, because at that point there could be new management. You should look into that.
Hmm.
But
Rebranding
if that is not
all
the
the time.
case, I mean, like when I went to Discovery Ranch, I looked up Discovery Ranch lawsuit afterwards. The first thing
Mhm.
that came up, I'm not going to go into details, but like it was bad and it was the year prior.
I've done
The
that as well.
year the year before I got there. So that would be my biggest thing is to any parents who have kids who are struggling with this is do your own research. Ed consultants are good, can be good, I should say, but there are many times when they're paid by both parents and treatment centers. And so you have to do your own research. She was 15 when she died,
Yeah.
which is when you're 15, I mean, high school, just trying to get through life. You should
Right.
be worrying about, ooh, who's dating who, not who's gonna die.
Right. Yeah.
That's, I mean, that's just crazy to me. Like,
That's the reality of life in these programs is you're always in survival mode. There's no getting out
yeah.
of it.
And
And
one thing I also do want to mention quickly is if you want more information than what I've given, and maybe Nora, you could also link this, is
okay.
the Mia Fontana Foundation, which is something her parents have set up.
Does that have a website?
Yep. I believe it's miafontanafoundation.org.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Mia's family. I know you stayed close with them. How has that been?
So I actually had no contact with her family whatsoever while she was at Grove. The way I got in contact with her was the little piece of her that I had left was her voicemail, which was her voice. Even if it was short, but it was her.
Yeah.
And after she died, there were quite a few times where I'd send a voicemail to her knowing I would never reach her, but it just felt like maybe. I don't know.
It's
And
comfort.
there's one,
And
yeah,
putting it into words helps get it out of your head.
yeah. And there was one day when I got a response back and was terrified
It was her
because it was a
mom, wasn't
response
it?
back from her number. Yeah, it was her mom. And that was when I really got in contact, talked through it all. Cause I mean, at Grove, she did not have a lot of friends.
Uh-huh.
She was fairly close with her cabin. Um, she had one person there who I would describe as a non-biological sister.
Yeah.
And like me and her hung out daily, and I miss those days. One thing that really threw me off after she died is Peter Chorney, who is he's the executive director of the school, came
Is
to
he
me
the son
afterwards
or the
and asked,
father?
son of the father, son. So
Okay.
son.
Okay.
Yeah. So he said, so Dylan, did Mia have a lot of friends? And my first thought is, what the fuck do you think?
Yeah.
Like, he was clearly looking for his own closure, but I couldn't give him that. I mean, truth was, she didn't have a lot of friends. Like 17-year-old kid who was grieving for his best friend.
And asking for that validation from a child who is under your care is totally inappropriate.
Yeah.
I know losing a friend is incredibly hard at any point, but losing a friend that is so young while you're so young, just something like that was entirely preventable. And then what do these programs look like in the aftermath when a student dies? What is their attitude? How do they approach kids? Do they provide things like grief counseling like public schools would?
I couldn't really tell you. So she died on a Thursday, like early Thursday morning. That the following Saturday was my 18th birthday. And then the Tuesday after that, I was sent to a psych ward against my will because my therapist had lied about something that I had said. And every time previously that I've been to a psych ward, I've known deep down that I needed to be there because I was unsafe.
Right.
That was a time when I truly feel that I did not need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that Saturday, I watched her parents had live streamed the funeral to YouTube because they knew she had friends at Grove. And I remember watching that in a cold hospital room with a nurse leaning over my shoulder the entire time instead of with my friends where I was supposed to be.
Right.
And then I got back the following Monday, and they had taken down the memorial. What they had said was due to the rain. So I asked, hey, when you guys gonna put it back up? I would love to go grieve for my friend.
Right.
And they said, don't worry, we'll let you know. And then they kept saying that for 2 weeks until I gave up asking.
Yeah. So they basically just covered it up, just like all the other ones.
Yeah. And now,
Even
like,
internally.
for the 1 year anniversary, I would think Grove would do something. But the one thing that we did is we had these little like pieces of wish paper that just burned up quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we lit one of those, and it was entirely student led
Mm-hmm.
because everyone else just seemingly chose not to remember.
Yeah.
All they said was like, hey, we know it's a rough time. If you need a therapist, go to them.
I mean, is it really all that surprising? Because did they ever do anything for Peter or Jonathan or Brendan?
Not that I know of.
Exactly.
It's not surprising, but it is deeply saddening and infuriating.
It is. It absolutely is. Well, can you just tell us about Mia? What made her special?
Sure.
Who was Mia?
So, I mean, Mia, the way that well, first of all, I want to start by saying she wasn't perfect. That's
No one
one thing that I struggled with a lot is I idolized her,
Mm-hmm.
but she wasn't perfect. I mean, but in a lot of ways, the ways that she wasn't perfect is what made her perfect. And I mean, she was fun. Like anytime she walked in anywhere, she would light up the room with her smile, laughing constantly, just joking around. There was one day we had gone to a high ropes course for an activity, and one of the people there was having a panic attack in our group. And so she went back and helped that person get all the way over. And it was just like, she just had such a kindness towards others. I mean, that's one thing you see a lot in treatment, is just
Mm.
people who care more about others than themselves. And just,
Some of the most hurt people are the best healers.
yeah, absolutely. And she just, I don't know.
And she loved animals,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. At the
Just
hobby farm at the time, we had 3 bunnies, which were Snap, Pop, and Ralph.
what about
And
Crackle?
Crackle died.
Oh my God.
Crackle was dropped by a student. So
Oh no. I think her love for
that's a whole
animals,
nother issue.
I think her love for animals is shown just in what she did in that crisis manic mode. The first thing she did was went straight to an animal.
Yeah. Because the thing is, animals, they don't judge people, they just are.
Well, Mia sounds like an incredible person.
She was. She had a pure soul.
And I'm sorry you had to lose her.
Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge her family, her parents, people who loved her. I hope with everything that I have that you find justice for her.
Me too. I don't know.
Kids don't get put in these programs because they're perfect and they have the perfect home life and they're a perfect student. They get there because they've experienced trauma and they have no support system. And Mia was one of those kids that the entire industry failed. She should be here now.
Yeah.
If it weren't for the actions of the owners and the employees of the Grove School, she would be here. And I think it's important to acknowledge responsibility where it needs to be taken. And I really hope that this lawsuit brings some peace and closure to those who love me.
Yeah.
And justice for her.
Yeah, one thing I definitely never understood before Mia was the importance of pictures.
I know David likes to end his episodes with like a fun little question. But I'm going to start doing the same thing. The question that I'm asking is, if you had to assign a song to your time in the troubled teen industry, what would it be? Or your healing afterwards?
That's a good question. I mean, let me just find it. It's called Everything's All Right by Conscience.
I'll have to listen to that.
It's in my sad boy rap playlist.
You have one of those too?
Oh, I'm pretty sure every TTI survivor has one at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we do too. So Dylan, thank you for being our guest today. And thank you so much for sharing everything that you know about Mia and her legacy and her story. I think it's really important for us to get that information out to people and show them that these kids aren't just troubled kids. They're kids in crisis and they need help. And this is not help. So I just want to thank you. I also want to thank Mia's family and her parents for just sharing Mia with us. Just by filing that lawsuit gives us an incredible insight into who Mia was. um, and exactly how the Grove School and the troubled teen industry failed her.
The last thing that I want to share is a quote.
Okay.
So when she died, there was no note or anything like you have in some cases, but there was a quote on the wall, and I just want to share that.
Okay.
When you go out into the woods and you look at trees, you see all these different trees, and some of them are bent, and some of them are straight, and some of them are evergreens, and some of them are whatever. And you look at the tree and you allow it. You see it is the way it is. You sort of understand that it didn't get enough light, and so it turned that way. You don't get all emotional about it. You just allow it. You appreciate the tree. The minute you get near humans, you lose all that. And you're constantly saying, you are to this, or I'm to this. That judgment mind comes in. And so I practice turning people into trees, which means appreciating them just the way they are.